Welcome to the CECI PC training session about connecting with SSH from Linux and macOS. In this session, you will learn how to access to the CECI clusters using SSH. Let's start with an introduction about what is SSH. SSH stands for Secure Shell and is a cryptographic network.
Toujours pas des sons?
All the data you send and receive over the network is encrypted. Let's say you are user 1 on a computer called host 1 and you want to connect to host 2 as user 2. Host 1 is called the client and OpenSSH client must be installed on the computer. This is the default for most of the Linux and macOS distributions. Host 2 is called the server. OpenSSH server must be installed. Host 2 is waiting for connection from clients on port number 22. SSH uses two keys, a public and a private key, also called identity files, to encrypt the data and authenticate users and hosts. Both the user 1 on the client and the computer server host 2 have a public and a private key. There is two ways to authenticate a user on the server. One way is using user 2 password. In this case, temporary keys are generated automatically for user 1 for the session. In the second way, user 1 has his own identity keys and user 2 has the user 1 public key to authenticate user 1 and allow the server to connect user 1 as user 2. Example, I am user 1 on host 1 and want to connect to host 2 as user 2. So I will type this command. First time I connect to host 2, I will receive its public key. Then I have to type the user 2 password. Now I am on host 2 and I can type commands and create files. Let's come back to host 1 and here we can see that the public key of host 2 is in user 1 account. We can create identity files for user 1. Let's use the default name for the output file, and now we have to type a passphrase to encrypt the private key. We can see that the private key of user 1 is encrypted. We also have the public key which identifies user 1. Now we can copy the public key of user 1 on user 2 at host 2. You see here we are sending the public key to user 2. We need the password of user 2 and now we can connect using the private key to user 2. Here we need to put the passphrase to decrypt the private key. You see now we are at host 2. And the public key of user 1 is in the authorized key file. The protocol for the connection and authentication used by SSH has 5 main phases. First, a TCP connection is established between the client and the server. The client connects to port 22 of the server. In the second phase, the client and the server send each other a string with the protocol and software version. Each host checks if the versions are not obsolete. In the next phase, both hosts will select which encryption algorithm will be used during connection. In phase 4, the user on the client gets the public key from the server so that the user 1 can authenticate the server. In phase 5, is the user who authenticates, and the host server will authorize user 1 to log in as user 2.
I will now show you how and in what context SSH is used at CECI. The infrastructure at CECI has 6 computing clusters of the Tier 2 type at present. The users of the CECI can, under certain conditions, have access to the Type 1 cluster located at Senaero. Each cluster is made up of a set of computers called compute nodes to submit tasks, storage nodes to keep your files, and an access node called frontend. All these nodes are interconnected by a private network. For example, in this image, you can see the front of the compute nodes, which are part of the LeMet3 cluster, and the back of the NIC4 cluster with the network cables connecting the nodes. The frontend is the special node to which you will connect with SSH. From this node, you will start your jobs, access the results and transfer data, edit your files, compile and debug your codes. You should not execute jobs that require a large amount of resources. You will penalize the other users connected to the frontend. Access to the frontend is protected by a firewall that only allows connection from a gateway. CECI users must go through a gateway to access the frontend. Here are the host names of the frontends on each cluster and the host names of the gateways. Take care that the users of ULB, ULiège and UMons must use the VPN of their institutions to access the gateway in some cases. Let's see now the procedure that is followed to create an account and to connect to the cluster frontends. As presented in the introduction, the SSH protocol uses public key cryptography to authenticate users and hosts. When you ask for a new CECI account or renew your account, 2 keys are generated, a private and a public one. The private key is encrypted using a passphrase and sent to you by email. You must store your private key in a safe place in your computer. Please note that the CECI does not keep a copy of your private key or passphrase. So if you lose your key, if you forget your passphrase, or if you think your key has been compromised, you must renew your CECI account. Your public key is copied to each CECI frontend and gateway for authentication. Each frontend and gateway also has its own private and public key for authentication.
To create a new account or renew your account, let's go to the CECI HPC website. Then go to the Create and Manage Account. If you create an account, choose Create Account. If you renew the account, as it's my case, go to Renew My Account. Put your institution email and ask for the renew. You will receive an email with a link to a form that you need to fill. Set your name, last name, and supervisor email. In my case, everything is already filled because I am just renewing the key. The only thing I have to put is my passphrase. Check the terms and conditions and send the form. Now you have to wait that a sysadmin will review your data and accept your account creation or renewal. Once your sysadmin has confirmed your account, you will receive an email with the new private key. Save your key on the download directory. Then with mkdir command, create a .ssh directory and change with chmod the directory permissions. Move your key from download directory to this new directory. Then change the permission of your private key to prevent everybody to read it. You can check permission with this command of your directory or your key. Then go to the SSH configuration wizard at the CECI website and choose your university. Set your CECI login name and your gateway login. This should be, in case of UNamur, your UNamur AID. For other universities, you will get different fields to fill. Check the Tier 1 option if you have an Tier 1 access. If you don't know, don't tick it. Then copy the contents of the wizard and create a config file and paste the contents of the wizard. Those are the different cluster access that you can get. Now I can connect, for example, to one of the clusters. First time you connect, you will receive the gateway public key. Then you have to enter the passphrase to decrypt the key to connect to the gateway. Now you will receive the public key of the front end. And then you will ask again the passphrase of your key to connect to the front end. Now I'm connected to Hercules front end. And for example, I can check all the compute nodes that are available to submit jobs. If you don't want to type your passphrase every time you want to connect to a cluster, you can use an agent. Most of the Linux and macOS distributions have an already running agent. You can check with this command. Here the agent is running, but there is no identities. In my case, which use GNOME keyring, you need to get the public key at the same place than the private one. So with this command, you can create the public key. Type the passphrase to decrypt the key and get the public one. And then you can check that the private key is now in memory. So next time you connect to the cluster, your agent will ask for the passphrase and will memorize it. Now that is in memory, if you connect again, you will not type the passphrase.
To end this presentation, I will give you an overview of 3 programs using SSH Protocol that you can use to transfer or access your files. SCP and rsync are part of the Linux or Mac OS distributions. SSH-FS, you need to install it. With SCP command, you can copy files or directories to or from the clusters. You can copy-paste the commands from the PDF of this presentation to do the following example. Create a local repository with 4 empty files. Then create a repository on a remote host. Here you can see that you can execute commands without logging into a shell prompt, just typing SSH, the host, and the command. Replace the host with one of the front-end hosts present in your configuration file. Then copy the directory to one of the front ends and check the copy with the remote command. You can also copy from the front end to your local computer. Copy between front ends is not permitted due to firewall rules, so you need to copy through computer using option 3. Also, the recommended way is using CECI transfer partition. Follow the link to see more information about this. rsync is widely used for backups and mirroring and as an improvement copy command for everyday use. Most common usage is to synchronize files with archive option A and compress option Z. rsync only transfers modified files. This makes rsync faster than SCP. For example, create a directory on the front end with 4 empty files and synchronize it to your local directory. Again, replace host by one of the front-end host names on your config file. Then modify only one file and synchronize again. You will see that only the modified file will be synchronized. If you modify a file on your computer and you don't want that rsync will override it, then synchronize with -u option. rsync will keep the files at the destination even if they are deleted at the source. This behavior is similar to a backup. With the -del option, the files deleted at source are also deleted at the destination. This behavior is similar to a mirror. SSHFS is used to mount a remote file system. You can install them on Linux distribution with apt-get or yum. On macOS, you need to download Fuse and SSHFS from this link. SSHFS is useful when you want to access your files with the local computer editor. I use it to versioning my code present on the cluster with my local version of Git. It is not efficient if you need to do intensive read and write operations. On this example, you are going to mount your CECI home on your local computer. Create on your computer a repository to mount the CECI home. Replace host by the name of the frontend you are going to use. Mount the remote CECI home using this SSHFS command. Here, replace the host by the name of one of the frontend. Same here. Then create a file in the mounted directory and check that this file exists on your CECI home. To disconnect, use the command usermount. To end this presentation, I will give you an overview of 3 programs using SSH Protocol that you can use in your configuration file and mirroring and as an improvement copy command -u option. With the local computer edit, create on your computer a repository is SSHFS command, one of the front end. Same here. Then create a file in the mounted directory and check that this file exists on your CECI home. To disconnect, use the command fuser mount. Bon, je crois que j'ai pris le mauvais. Il a mal fini. Il avait dupliqué.
Okay, thank you, Juan. So we have times for questions. Do not hesitate to ask them in the Q&A window. If your question is too complex to be able to answer it in the Q&A window, we will try to have one-on-one meetings with every of you. So if you need help, just ask something in the Q&A window.
I can show also the frequent mistakes.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you see it?
Yes.
So the frequent mistakes that you can have when trying to connect. The first is you have bad permissions on your private key. So remember that we used a command here to change the permissions, /mode 600. So if you get this error that the permissions are too open, check that you have the good permissions. Next error is that you are not asked by a passphrase of your key, but a password of user in the remote host. This is you are not using a key or you are using the wrong key. So check that in your configuration file you have the good key here in the identified entry. Another error that you can have is you are asked by the passphrase and then by the password of the user in the host. This means that the CECI key is not the good one. So the problem can be that you have renewed your key and you forget to change it with the new one, or you put the new one, but the old is still in the front ends. So you have to wait 20 minutes that the new key will be synchronized on all the front ends. And if you go to the PDF, I just put more information about SSH and about the protocol. I also put the link of this presentation on Indigo website. Thank you.
So there's a question, how can we copy files between clusters using SCP? So Juan, do you want to answer the question?
I don't see the questions. Sorry.
The question is,
how can we copy files between cluster? Well, it's using the option -3, but it's not the best way. It's better to use the file transfer. So let's see the link. I send the link. The presentation. Oops. Come on. You can get the presentation on the Indico's website, and there you can get the link to. Here, you see the link to the explanation about CECI transfer. So you copy. We are on a cluster, on the front end of a cluster. You have access to the CECI transfer directory. You put your data there, then you log out to this cluster and you go to another one, and you have also this partition at the same place, and you will find your files there. So to recopy between clusters, this is the best way. Don't use ECP. The other way should be a copy from cluster 1 to your computer, and then from your computer to cluster 2. But it's not the best way. But remember that this transfer file is just to transfer, so don't keep your data there, just time of transfer the data.
If you want more information about that, there's a session by Ariel Lozano next week, I think, that explains how to transfer data using the data that Juan just mentioned. Okay, so if there are no more questions, we will end the session here. We still have some people who we are trying to help with other media. So thank you for your attendance and see you next time.